Christine Schneider, the Visceral Voice.
Welcome to the Visceral Voice podcast. I'm your host, Christine Schneider. Every 2 weeks on this podcast, I talk with voice specialists, manual therapists, health specialists, psychotherapists, movement practitioners, and professional voice users about voice science, function, medication, movement, puberty and aging, and everything in between. I am on a quest, not only to become a better manual therapist, but also to learn everything I can about the living, breathing body and its intricate connection to the voice. This podcast documents the continuation of my learning and my experience as a professional singer, a nutritional consultant, and a manual therapist. Join me every 2 weeks as we strive to provide current, knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate information to help restore, regain, and create happiness and success in your vocal journey. Peter Coppola is an internationally recognized physical therapist, practitioner, and teacher. He is an instructor for the Barral Institute and is a diplomate certified therapist of visceral manipulation and neuromeningeal manipulation. When he isn't teaching internationally, you can find him in his private practice, Let the Good in Portland, Oregon. Peter and I had some technical difficulties, so we had to do multiple takes on 2 separate days, so please forgive the sound quality and some of the sound changes. But here you are, my conversation with Peter Coppola. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. I am so stoked to be talking with you and to be learning from you with your in-depth knowledge regarding viscera and neurology and kinesiology and fascia. And I am so thrilled to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to become a physical therapist?
I was involved in a lot of sports through high school and decided I wanted to go into something that would allow me to apply science and movement. And when I found physical therapy, I connected with somebody locally, and they showed me that I could really do quite a bit with it. If I wanted to stay with the sports side, I could. The school systems is where I actually wound up kind of getting my start. And it allowed me to just have a lot of different approaches that I could kind of follow through on.
Oh, that's so great. And how long have you been a physical therapist?
It was funny. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day. It's been 20 years now. I've been a PT since 99.
Wow. That is so amazing. And you and I are the same age, so you were a baby when you started.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you are a teacher at the Barral Institute. Are you the youngest teacher there?
Yes, actually, it was kind of a funny conversation we had. Another therapist or teacher was saying that they thought they were the youngest, and we went through, and I think I beat them by a couple months.
Yay! Congratulations. That is so awesome.
Thanks.
And so in the study of visceral manipulation, we're going to talk about, now this podcast is actually geared towards the professional voice user, so a lot of people aren't going to know what we're talking about, but I think it's a really important modality, and I think it's very important for people to know. I'm going to allow you to kind of explain where it comes from, but Jean-Pierre Barral describes visceral manipulation in the following quote. He says, "The purpose of visceral manipulation is to recreate, harmonize, and increase proprioceptive communication in the body to enhance its internal mechanism for better health." Can you elaborate on why visceral manipulation is so beneficial, but start with actually defining and telling our listeners what visceral manipulation actually is?
Yeah, it's something where born of the osteopathic realm, if you go back 100 years, 200 years, they didn't have the fancy surgeries and medicines that we have now. So a lot of doctors were using manual therapy to treat their clients for any problem that they were presented with. And through the years, medicine has advanced into more of the surgery and medicine or chemical realms and somewhat left behind the manual side of things. So that's where the osteopaths, specifically in Europe, have kind of stayed with their identity of the manual approach, more of a whole body holistic approach. And from that arena, Jean-Pierre Barral was able to really hone his skills along with extraordinary talent that he has for manual therapy. And he was able to take and really advance the skills that maybe from years past had been a little less precise, pressing on the stomach versus pressing on the curvature of the stomach where the nerve innervates the stomach. He's really brought a precision to it. And the whole concept is for the body to identify that there's a restriction that it's been compensating for. It's like anything in our lives, sometimes you don't really realize something's a problem or not as efficient as it could be until somebody else says, hey, do you know you're doing this? So with the visceral technique, we identify the area of the body, looking at the whole body, regardless of where the symptoms are. We look for the area of the body that gives us the most attraction all at one time, so that when we work in that one spot, we actually release the entire body. And the other piece of it that's important is pushing on something to make it move is therapist driven. When we do our work, most of our work is around identifying the restriction pattern, engaging into the pattern in its natural reaction, and then enhancing and holding it so that the body makes the change rather than the therapist. That way, it's really enhancing the internal mechanism. And the really nice part about that is somebody walks away from that release. And I like to use the word they own the release. It's not a rented release. It's not something that you have to release 5 more times. If something really releases in the middle of a session, the body has eliminated the attraction in a way that should be lasting rather than something that has to be gone back to time and time and time again.
Something I really loved when I started studying visceral manipulation was that it has such precision with the anatomy.
Right. Yeah, you're overlaying a location in the body with multiple visuals or images in your mind of what anatomy is there. So if you're working on something that's more of a curved hollow organ like the stomach, you're going to have to approach it differently than if you're working with something dense like a kidney or a liver. So the approach needs to be tailored to the tissue. And the hardest part about it is you could be in the exact same spot, but if you're 3 millimeters deeper, you're on a different organ completely.
Right. I do want to say, just for our listeners, whether you are a practitioner or whether you are just curious, I'm just going to talk about the term manipulation for a minute. In Europe, manipulation means something different than it does here in the States. In Europe, it means to care for with your hands. And here in the States, it means to break through a barrier. So we are actually, as visceral manipulation practitioners, using the European term to care for with your hands. What we're actually doing is more organ-specific fascial mobilization. So I just want to clarify that, because when we hear manipulation, we get a little terrified of what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's something we had a debate with Jean-Pierre about 15 years ago regarding that concept. And, he just said, we see it as manipulation means use of the hand. How forceful that hand is used comes back to the practitioner's approach. So with the style that we do, we're using less of a go through the barrier concept and more of a, if I hold close to the barrier, your body says, "Ooh, I don't really like that." And the body will make the change without being or feeling aggressed. So it is very delicate.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And I also learned in studying visceral manipulation that one of the reasons why we study it as practitioners is because about 90% of musculoskeletal dysfunction involves viscera. It's not necessarily caused by it, but it involves it because the viscera is right in the middle of everything.
Yeah, it's something I use the budget analogy when I talk to my patients. Yeah, each month your bank account gets a little smaller because you pay your mortgage, you pay your utilities, you go out to dinner a couple times, you might buy some new clothes. And typically the biggest bill and the first one paid out is our mortgage or our rent check. And when we identify the whole pattern of the body, that rent check might not be what we're unhappy about. We may be very happy with the house we're paying for, but we may not be happy that we can't go out to dinner. So you may have a location of symptoms, and the symptoms are a result of that balance sheet saying I can or I can't take care of this area. because my funds are diverted somewhere else. So what I like to say is, let me look at your entire body rather than your symptoms first, then overlay where your symptoms are and decide, how is your body not taking care of this, or what is your body doing? The thing to also remind clients about is the symptoms that you have are not your body fighting against you. The symptoms you have are a result of your body working very hard to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's not enough left over, the squeaky wheel kind of tries to get the grease, in that it is where the symptoms will pop up. And that sometimes is where we work, but it's not always where we work.
Right. Great. And you've mentioned the gentleness of visceral manipulation, the practice of visceral manipulation. We are kind of in a generation that spreads thought viruses, like no pain, no gain.
Sure.
Maybe discuss what you've learned through visceral manipulation or through current research that has informed therapeutic approaches to the body in this more precise, minimal force practice.
Yeah, it's something where I like to just say, as a general concept, there's an appropriate time and place for everything. There are times that I do use more force, yet it's always the question of, if this job could be done with less force, less discomfort, less time recovering from what I just did to somebody, that's going to be a huge advantage. And unfortunately, when you're not listening to the entire body, you have a tendency to try to fight upstream, kind of backwards or reverse engineering the problem and trying to snip off a little bit at a time, almost like weeding. You want to get to the root of the problem. So when you get to the root of a problem, when you really see where the entire body is focused, your technique can be more efficient. Therefore, you need less force, less effort, less repetition. And it's more just of like high tech versus low tech. You don't need a lot of force if you're being extremely accurate.
Right. So how did you start studying visceral manipulation? What brought you to that practice?
My first job working with kids, I was seeing some slow results, and it's kind of expected in that arena. Yet my mind really thinks about nuts and bolts and completing projects. And I was really frustrated that some of the kids I was working with were not making better progress in areas that I thought I should be able to help them with. I started actually studying craniosacral therapy, and it didn't quite click with me. I really enjoyed it. I saw great results, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for until I found visceral. And that's where, without really knowing what I was doing, just getting started, I applied a couple techniques and saw tremendous changes, instant tremendous changes. And the nuts and bolts mindset says, wait a minute, I've been working for 9 months, 10 months on somebody, seeing little to no progress. And in 5 minutes time, I just made a huge change. So there is something that I'm completely missing. There's something that I either didn't understand in school, or there's something in addition to the traditional things taught in school that through some continuing education, I can become much more highly skilled. So that's really what drove me down the path.
Yes, same for me. So I would love to talk about the emotional connection. Something I really loved about, I loved many things when I started studying visceral manipulation. I already mentioned that it had such precision with the anatomy. But what I also really found interesting was that it did go back kind of to an Eastern ideology of having an emotional connection with each organ, which we studied in Eastern medicine.
Mm-hmm.
In the visceral manipulation courses and in many of Jean-Pierre's books, which he's written, I don't know, like over 15, a couple of them, Understanding the Messages of Your Joints and Understanding the Messages of Your Body, he talks about this emotional connection. Mm-hmm. Could you expand on that for us? Maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, it's something where your body has reactions. And, in general, I like to say that I don't do necessarily viscera manipulation. I do visceral manipulation. Mm-hmm. So the visceral manipulation is anything that causes a visceral reaction. So that's if you accidentally step on something sharp, your foot comes flying off of it. It's a visceral reaction. It's a reflex built in. When you have stomach pain, your body kind of curls forward. Oh, my stomach hurts. And bringing up the exam or going down the line that you just said, that's like saying I heard the bad news and it felt like I was kicked in the stomach.
Right.
So your body will very strongly react to psychological stresses. And instead of overloading and kind of frying the circuitry, making us pass out when our brains become overwhelmed, each of our organs acts like a little bit of a junk drawer where we can throw that extra little stress we don't want to deal with. Take the stress off of our brain, put it somewhere else for now, hopefully just now, hopefully we deal with it. But if we don't, it stacks up. So you get people, classic example, work is stressful and I have ulcers. So you can actually cause the health of an organ to diminish through not taking care of psychological stresses. And the opposite's true. If you have a bad stomach, it's potentially going to make you a little more nervous, make you a little more stressed. So the stomach is a little more of a social, professional self. And another great example is the liver. So your liver is a detoxifier. And if your liver's not doing its job, you become toxic and somebody can act like a toxic person. So stress around anger, frustration can really hit your liver or cause you to be more sensitive and react that way if your organ's not functioning correctly.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples of maybe someone that you've worked with throughout the years that you really had with anyone a strong emotional connection that the two of you had to work through together?
Yeah, it's also something that you kind of look at scope of practice. So I refer out quite a bit. I really believe in community. I really believe in everybody should be really, really good at what they do and know somebody who's really, really good at what they're not really great at. So when you get into too much of a psychological stress or too big or too significant of a history, I've always made referrals out to counselors and therapists that I know. But in sessions, I have had people who, in the middle of a release, they say, wow, that's really familiar. And you can see that they're kind of chewing on it a little bit. They're kind of thinking, they're like, what is that? And sometimes they come up with a really kind of startling realization. They're like, wow, I guess I've always held tension there ever since that situation in high school or college when I felt really terrible about something, or when I was in a car accident that I thought I was going to die. And I guess I didn't realize that I was holding that stress pattern as my body was trying to deal with it.
And now, when you and I have worked together, when you've worked on me, and every time I've had a session in visceral manipulation, the practitioner has always had to go to my head after treatment. Can you explain why that is happening?
Yeah, we start at the head because we want to see the entire body's reaction. So we evaluate in standing from the head. Throughout the session, we come back to that. And then at the end of a session, being that your brain is really the hub of everything that's going on, whether it's emotions, whether it's something physical, physiological, movement, all of the above. So we want to make sure that things are integrated from that standpoint. So if you're still having a bit of a reaction or a tension from the head, it could cause things to not integrate as smoothly or quickly. So we like to end there to make sure we kind of tie things together.
Yeah. And can you talk to us a little bit about the visceral connection with the voice?
Yeah, absolutely. You have different layers of the cervical fascia around the structures in the front of the cervicals. And if you have too much tension, it's going to decrease blood flow. It's going to increase pressure. Certainly, you could have tension on the esophagus pulling down, which can pull on the pharynx. It could be something up higher. You could have had a concussion that caused cranial tension. We talk about the dura as being one of the meninges around the brain and the spinal cord. So people that when they tie their shoes get a burning down their back, do you have so much dural neural tension that it's actually causing a shift in the way your head sits on your spine, sits on your thoracic outlet? And will that change the way your vocal structures are tensioned? I would say absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. And what about the neural connections with the voice?
Yeah, the neural kind of goes down the pathway that I spoke about a minute ago with the dura. If you have a hyperactivity of a nerve, it's facilitated because your whole nervous system is a bit irritated. Think about the difference when you're singing if you have a headache or a migraine. How do you feel? How does your voice and quality sound? Can you sustain a note? When you have something going on in your nervous system, it's going to change the overall tension. And, you could get into, I may not be using quite the right word, but dysphonia. Some of the speech therapists that I've worked with throughout the years, we've definitely seen some major changes when the viscera system, the vascular system, the carotid sheath, the esophagus, everything as it stacks up behind the vocal cords and the structures around it, as things are stacking up, if they're rubbing on each other, if they're in a heightened state of protection through the nervous system, you're going to wind up being pretty inefficient. So that another analogy I really like to use is driving with your parking brake on. If you take off from a parking space and your car's not driving very well, you should check your parking brake. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're going to be driving really hard to go not very quickly.
So we have briefly discussed the emotional connection with the viscera, and you mentioned the stomach and social life. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about this connection in regards to maybe like a diagnosis like acid reflux?
Yeah, it's, something like acid reflux can be stimulated by a lot of factors. There, the obvious one is, and I like to strip it down to the simple fact that acid reflux is acid in the wrong location. Most people think it's too much acid. And what happens in tying in emotions to the story is you're now taking something that's mechanical, trying to seal the top of the stomach, like the esophageal sphincter, so that the acid stays where it's supposed to be. And we absolutely need acid, otherwise we don't digest properly. So people who chronically are trying to shut the acid down may not have the whole picture. And beyond the mechanical piece of how tight is your diaphragm, how tight is your esophagus, where is the stomach in the position, if you throw the emotional component in, it's the old story of you hear bad news, it feels like you were kicked in the stomach. And that tension, that pressure is only going to further increase pressure on the esophagus, and like squeezing a Ziploc bag, eventually that seal will start to leak. And that leak, does not feel very good. It starts to stimulate more and more irritation, so it turns into a vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. In your practice, have you found that patients were able to avoid surgeries like a fundoplication because of the visceral manipulation treatment?
Absolutely. I've had people that were about to have esophageal dilations, surgeries around the stomach itself, and essentially it's just approaching it from a different perspective. I think the usual playbook from the traditional medical community is, if we can't fix it with some simple things, like position stretching, and if we can't fix it with medications, the only alternative takes us straight to surgery. And that's where it's really great for people like your practice and my practice. When we're approaching things, we have more tools. We have varying degrees of approaches that don't have to jump straight to surgery. Mm-hmm. And the problem solving of visceral manipulation in general really accounts for more. I absolutely have had people with acid reflux, with issues down lower in the stomach, where I needed to work in their pelvis and in their cervical area, or their neck and throat. And by releasing the pressures above and below, suddenly the stomach started feeling better. Mm-hmm. And then the other approaches like activities, stretches, other therapies that people were working with started being more effective, and medications were more effective, or medications became unnecessary. So it's really taking into account the bigger picture of the whole person, rather than only treating an isolated part like a stomach that's having some form of dysfunction that's pushing somebody down the line of, I don't know, so let's try surgery.
Yeah, right. I just asked specifically about the stomach, but have you had in your practice other surgeries that people were able to avoid?
Yeah, quite a few. And it again depends on the history. The histories make it more complicated in the conversation of what I am able and not able to help people with. I've definitely had a number of people that were told your gallbladder is dysfunctional, or they were told you have this pain and tension around your diaphragm and upper abdomen. We happen to find something in the gallbladder, so we'd like to take it out because that's the next logical step. Mm-hmm. So again, we go back to that kind of cookie cutter, one size fits all. And luckily, they were a little more stubborn than their doctor wanted them to be. They started doing some research, found somebody like myself that does visceral. And I absolutely have had people, I've been able to check in with some people 3 to 5 years later, and they haven't had to have their gallbladders out. So that's more of a direct organ, the doctor says you have to have this out kind of thing. But the other one is esophageal dilations for people that have trouble swallowing or problems around the vagus nerve and the esophagus. Mm-hmm. And absolutely adhesions in the abdomen. So you get into problems with endometriosis adhesions or other surgeries that now lead to somebody having a bad cycle of needing to have scar tissue cleaned out in their abdomen. And everything from, instead of every 6 to 12 months, people are going every 2 to 3 years, to people haven't had to have surgeries at all.
That is so great.
Yeah, it's a great part of what we do. It's that fun part of problem solving, like a detective, figuring out the best way to try to achieve something. And then, the best reward is the patient calls back super excited saying, holy cow, this is actually making a difference right away.
Yeah. You just mentioned the vagus nerve. Can you talk to us more about this wandering nerve, which is a huge topic, I know, but just an intro into?
Yeah, the vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves, and with that, it's coming off of the brain at the top, just to simplify where it's coming from. Most of the other nerves are going to come down the spinal cord and then out through the spine. So this comes out, there's a foramen, a hole in the bottom of the skull that it comes out. It runs with your carotid sheath right next to the vocal structures in the front of the throat, and then runs with your esophagus. So it runs right down the esophagus through the hiatus where people get acid reflux. And the last part that's really more easily palpable for a therapist is on the curvature of the stomach. So anywhere along this path, we can start to get disruptions. And what the big player, the vagus nerve, kind of plays into the system, what it does is it helps balance the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it's part of the parasympathetic system. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to keep the body out of a fight or flight, which is that state where our body shuts down our digestion and tries to shunt blood toward the arms and legs so we can run away, like the saber-toothed tiger caveman situation. When you see the saber-toothed tiger, you better jump into sympathetic and run away so you can survive. So the vagus nerve needs to be properly firing at the right times, and it can affect even things down into bladder and bowel function, that people may sustain an injury like a cervical whiplash and then have trouble with bowel and bladder function. So it's something where you really have to get a quality therapist that can kind of trace out these tension patterns to figure out where the wire is getting sparked a little bit or irritated.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And we hear about toning or stimulating or balancing the vagus nerve. Can you talk to us about that terminology?
Yeah, it's, again, whether you have too much or not enough activation, it may cause somebody to use different terms, but essentially, after you put away the mechanical side that hopefully we as therapists can manually treat and improve, then the patient can take over, just like doing exercises for your voice, doing exercises if you have back pain to maintain your system. There are vagal toning exercises or stimulating exercises that are trying to activate and also cause a deactivation. So by stimulating it, you're also helping it to turn on, turn off. And there's everything from the more abrupt taking cold showers and trying to spark your entire body into a sympathetic parasympathetic rebalancing. There's certainly one of the classic ones that I'll give people if I do in my clinic is pranayama type yoga breathing with slowing the breath down, doing a bit of a hold. So a common one is 5 seconds breathing in, about a 5-second hold, 10 seconds breathing out, about a 5-second hold, and then cycling back through breathing in, just so that you're starting to take control of and slow down what's happening with the breathing, and also the direct relationship of the diaphragm to the vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite exercises was in an acting class, actually, and the teacher had us all lay our heads on someone else's belly and then had the first person laugh, and laughter can help stimulate or tone the vagus nerve. And so we all just, as someone's belly started to bounce, we all just started laughing.
Absolutely.
And it was such a fun and an incredible exercise. And at the end, we stood up and we all felt so different than when we started. Our stress level wasn't as high. Our anxiety about doing our scenes wasn't as high. It's such an amazing exercise. So one of my favorite ones is laughter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also brings back what you asked before about the stress. If you laugh, you're changing your mental approach, your focus, your thought process at that moment, and that can reduce the stress. The movement, the quicker movement of the diaphragm can help change the tone. Certainly is changing pressure. So it's a really great exercise it really hits a lot of systems all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think emotions, injury, and trauma almost always affect the voice?
We're really we're a big bundle of systems, and at any one moment, it's kind of surprising that we survive sometimes, how delicate our systems can be, and yet the resiliency of our systems is so amazing. And you can take a system like the emotions and get into an overloaded situation. And we know that, people who are upset, their voice starts to waver. We know that in trauma situations, when people have, a real major injury, they go into shock. So you can have kind of a residual issue from the shock. And our body can kind of disrupt some of the autopilot that we are on. We can't actually think about every single thing that we do as we move through our day. It would drive us crazy. It would be too much information. So a lot of what we do is on autopilot. And if you start to disrupt how the autopilot is interacting with the rest of the system, it takes a bit for the body to recalibrate. And that's where hopefully we can come in with some manual therapy, ease some of that reactivity, and get the person's autopilot system back to at least where it was, if not find some other things that might even take it a bit further and improve it.
Mm-hmm. If you were to meet someone and they were to say, I've already tried PT, it didn't work for me, what would be your response to this person?
It's a pretty common one, actually. It's something where I run into people all the time. They say, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm licensed as a physical therapist, but I'm really a specialist when it comes to manual therapy. And immediately, most people will say, oh, I've tried physical therapy for my back. It didn't work. And it's something where I just really try to remind people that there's always a quality of technique issue. There's a quality of training. Some people are just very good at what they do, and other people aren't. So, to the vocal people that you're working with, I'm sure that they've worked with voice coaches some time through their career, and probably many different coaches. And they know that one coach may offer something another one wouldn't. Mm-hmm. They know that as they achieve more skill in their own use of their voice, there's lessons from long ago and newer coaches that can push them even further. So reminding people that not all PTs are created equal. I definitely interact as I teach the visceral curriculum. I interact with massage therapists, chiropractors, medical doctors, other physical therapists, and it's something where the license starts to be less important, and the skill the application of the techniques really kind of comes to the forefront. So when people say I've been to a physical therapist before, I say, well, you've been to a therapist. And remember that, your symptoms weren't created in just one day. Therefore, it may not fix in one day. And more importantly, not all therapists are really skilled at one piece or another. So I really believe really strongly in the community approach. And I have 2 or 3 other physical therapists that I refer my patients to. I think it's really critical that we work as a team, because the other 2 PTs that I often refer to, as well as I have 2 other massage therapists that I refer to as well, they can get a piece that makes me better. So rather than me exhausting my skill and then saying I have nothing more, go to somebody else, what's nice is if I can get something started and then send them to somebody else so that they can get something started as well, and then I can come back in, it actually causes all of us to look a lot better. It causes all of us to be a lot more effective. Mm-hmm. So I just like to, wrapping that back to your question, it's a question of, what are you wanting to change in your body, and have you really given it more than just a singular pigeonholed approach like I went to a physical therapist? It's really finding the therapists that have pushed their own careers to a higher level and searched out better and more effective skills so that they can be really good at what they do.
Yeah, I completely agree about the community or teamwork aspect of therapy. And even in New York City, there are several voice teachers who actually work together, and they actually work together in a community of teaching pedagogy, teaching new students who are becoming teachers. And so the student can go and watch the teacher work with other students, and then they can go to another teacher and watch that person work, and go to another teacher and watch that person work. And in the voice community, that's quite rare, because a lot of times it's, no, this is what I do, and they do something else. Well, what they do is ridiculous. Well, what? So to have that kind of community where everyone's doing something different because they're all different people, and so their teaching is different, but to come together and allow the students to learn from each teacher, and then each teacher learns from each teacher, and it just helps everyone grow to such a different level. And they're the top teachers in New York City.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a critical importance. If we want to keep pushing the field forward, we do need to work together. And the territorial action that a lot of people have taken, hopefully, is getting less and less. And it's definitely the people who are really confident and good at what they do that aren't afraid to say, you know what, I think this other person might have something really great to offer you, and then I'd like to see you come back because I have another piece as well.
Yeah. So what is some advice that you would want to give to a professional voice user?
You get out what you put into work, like body work and therapy. So what we were talking about, find a good therapist, find somebody that wants to work in a community, find somebody that wants to really support the process that you're looking to achieve, and make sure that you give it the time and give it the effort, whether it's exercises and stretches and things that you do to really enhance what you're doing. If you're going to be a professional, you have to treat it as a professional would.
Yeah, you only have one body.
Right.
What has been your greatest professional achievement?
That's a tough one. I think a lot of it comes back to my client outcomes. The thing that really keeps me in the field, the thing that I really enjoy, is being that therapist that found something everybody else missed. I like to say I do something different than everybody else. I evaluate differently than everybody else, because I want to see if I can find something that other people are missing to help you. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely the client comes in, or I get a phone call from a family member thanking me. I would say those are the achievements that are probably the most special for me, because it's really the outcome. It's I could say, I'm really happy that I became a PT. I'm really happy that I became a visceral teacher. But those are personal things. Those are more what I wanted to achieve. But my career and my goals as a therapist are really about helping my clients. So it's when you see a huge breakthrough that you really kind of say, this is exactly why I do what I do.
What has been your greatest professional setback?
Some of the setbacks were learning lessons like sending people to bigger communities because you're not achieving what you want with that client. You're not getting that improvement for them. And, as I say it as a setback, but it's more of just finding the humble place to work from, finding a place where you can say, I'm not the best person for this immediate need. And by helping that person get to the better person, I guess you turn one instance of hey, we're not getting this improvement into potentially an achievement for that person. So the setbacks, I think, come all the time. And that's what pushes us to be better. If I didn't like the way I made a release on a client's stomach or vagus nerve or esophagus, it's what can I do to really practice? And I go back to my techniques and I grab other instructors and say, help me with this technique so I can get better at it.
Mm-hmm. What do you wish you would have learned sooner?
I got into visceral so early in my career, and I would say a lot of therapists say, I wish I had learned visceral sooner. I think it's just more skills. I love using so many other skills. A part of me wishes that I could study everything.
Me too.
So if I could go back 20 years, when I was just becoming a PT, if I could go back then and say, well, start studying this other stuff, even if you just read it a little bit, it'll start helping you rather than needing to wait 20 years and the light bulb to go on and say, okay, now I need to study this. But yeah, I feel like I was really fortunate to get into this career early, get into PT, but more importantly, get into visceral. That's really the visceral manipulation style is what keeps me as a therapist. It's what I really truly enjoy, so that I'm really adapting it to every person's need each time they come in.
If the listeners would like to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that, Peter?
I have a company with my wife, Sarah Coppola and Peter Coppola. We have Let the Good In, so letthegoodin.com. And there's more information there. My wife and I both do yoga. She has some nutritional and kind of food and diet information that's really great with the blog and recipes. You can read more about my philosophy, and certainly through the institute that I teach for is the Barral Institute.com, and it's BARRAL Institute.com. So either one of those are a great way. Otherwise, if people have direct questions, they're welcome to reach out. My email is peter@letthegoodin.com. So it's that community thing again. I really think it's important to be available to answer those questions. So people are welcome to touch base.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. To all of the listeners, Peter is my mentor in visceral manipulation. He's been very open about teaching me and willing to teach me. So when he's talking about community, he really does mean it. And I really appreciate that, Peter, and all of the help that you've given me in the past couple years since I took my first class with you. And I can't wait to continue that mentorship. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for talking with me and coming onto the podcast. It's been really such an awesome experience to learn, hopefully for our listeners, to learn something that they know nothing about. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I really appreciate having me on, and you've been an excellent person to work with. It's weird to call somebody a student because it's definitely professionals working together, and you have some excellent skills. So it's always great to work with you, and I appreciate this opportunity a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like us, tell your colleagues, your students, and your friends. Subscribe, write a review, and find us on Facebook at Lifelight Massage. You can also check out my website at lifelightmassage.com. Please join me in 2 weeks for a talk with opera singer and voice teacher Nicholas Simpson. Thanks so much for listening.